All right, Albert, you're on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Inveniam podcast. This is the latest episode in our series in Decentralized Future of Capital Markets. And today's episode is on blockchain plus AI transforming enterprises. So you might notice that usually our usual host, Pat O'Meara, is not here with us today. So it has fallen to me, Albert Berdellans, the head of Inveniam's AI division, to host today's podcast. And I'm joined by two very capable participants, and let me allow each of them to introduce themselves, but I will just say their names for the record. We have Kevin Cuddeback, our chief data scientist, and then we have Rick Bunker, our chief technical officer. So Kevin, could you just give the 2-minute intro on who you are and why everyone should listen to you?
Sure. I mean, the big thing is that I've spent now 25 years helping companies manage through innovation transitions. It always, for me, happened to be the sort of data or data-driven marketing part of those transitions. Sometimes it was on the innovation process. But, Albert, you're doing actually a lot of the work sort of right at the coalface on AI now. The title of chief data scientist at Inveniam now means just managing all the innovation around where data comes from and where data goes in the Inveniam system.
Thanks for that, Kevin. We'll expand on that in a little bit. So Rick Bunker, you're up. Tell people who you are.
I'm Rick Bunker. I'm Inveniam's Chief Technology Officer and Chief Product Officer. I've spent my career building software for financial services firms, primarily. Early in my career at big public companies like State Street, Global Advisors, SEI Investments, more recently in PE or venture-backed companies.
Very impressive backgrounds from both of you. So let's set the stage on what we're talking about here. Blockchain plus AI. Are we just mashing two things together that don't really go, or is this a peanut butter and jelly kind of thing?
I can take a first swing at that, I guess. It's not just buzzword bingo. We're doing something very specific with it. We look at AI as having a great strength in analyzing big hunks of data quickly, but not perhaps always as accurately as we would hope. It might summarize something that we want it to quote, or it might interpolate values that we only want the precise original values from. And that's where we bring the blockchain in. So we use AI to do the analysis, but then we turn its responses into specific quotations of actual documents. And we create a proof of that quotation and anchor that to blockchain, which is a widely distributed, shared public database that's immune from change. So we have an irrefutable proof that the information came from a particular document in a particular place, with AI making that process much more efficient.
Wow, thanks, Rick. So I've noticed that we are now joined by our CEO, Pat O'Meara. Sorry, Pat, I thought we were going to get away with this one, and the kids were going to be able to run the show. But yeah, if you want to just take the reins, they're all yours.
Well, I want to keep the conversation that you guys have had going and kind of take a step into this. So sorry about that for the technical difficulties on my side. But I'd like to maybe frame what Rick was talking about as we think about the next generation of capital markets in a decentralized version. Whereas we think about next generation capital markets, we're a digital instrument existing on a distributed ledger, not a single ledger, but a distributed ledger that has compute performing in a distributed fashion, right? So think about cloud, think about the many different systems that people use serially to inform that digital instrument on the distributed ledger that then is connecting up to, a distributed data and not one centralized database. And any function that constrains distributed ledger to a single ledger, destroys the possibility of network effect without that choke point. Any compute where you can only use one form of compute, one LLM for an AI agent, right? One waterfall tool, one valuation tool, one whatever it might be. Anything that you do that it constrains compute. We only compute on these machines on site, right? What it does is it constrains the ability to process that data that you also don't want to have, say, for us to process data, we can only use one state of data, which is a centralized. We can't pull data from the edge. We can't see real time into underlying systems. And so as we think about this, we want to talk about the role of these new technologies coming online and working in effect, and how that's going to transform the capital markets. And AI has a particular and unique role in this space, right? To really drive this, to identify the right data at the edge, put it into such a position that it can be used to compute at scale, right? And I'm going to maybe say one more word, and then I'm going to turn it back over for you guys to continue with the conversation that had already started. Again, please excuse my tardiness. That where we take these next steps as we think about compute coming into private markets at scale, right? One could argue that compute is in public markets at scale, high frequency trading, right? One could even argue that there's too much compute where algorithmic trading can swing the fundamentals of the underlying asset, right? And distend the market away from the true value of the asset, as what is designed to create efficiency actually distends the market. But in private markets, compute has not been pushed into those at scale. And there's a number of reasons why that's the case. We're going to unpack some of those today. We're going to talk about how AI can open up new doors. But maybe if we can, I want to take a step back, because when you really get a number of these really great tools coming together and new technologies, you explode the possibility of each of the technologies uniquely, right? And I want, and maybe Kevin, I'll come to you as the president of analogies, as our chief data scientist, right? And then we'll go to Rick. When we think about the internet, until broadband came around, there wasn't really the ability for the internet to fully function, right? And what were the technologies that came together that allowed the internet really to bloom and blossom, where it took multiple pieces really for the full promise of the internet to become real? And Kevin, I'll throw that to you, but Rick, I also give that to you as well.
Kevin, you're muted.
I mean, one of the magical technologies back then was Ajax. The idea that, before everything was a drop-down menu and the page would refresh, but with Ajax, suddenly the user on this end could watch the page update in little pieces at a time as they worked. And so that was, instead of everything being done on the central computer somewhere, suddenly software as a service became possible, really, at that moment. It allowed you to interact with a web application as fluently as you could with a desktop application. So for me, that is one of those, by pushing. Compute is kind of a grand word, but in 2003 or whenever that was a big moment when they pushed over the web your interactions with the software live in your browser. So I think that was a good moment of distributing compute, and was transformative and was magical for anyone who experienced it at that moment. And so if people remember that transition, that's a lot of what we're doing with AI. Moving the AI experience closer to people, but also keeping it in a software as a service framework.
And Rick, let me throw that back to you also for a minute. Anything you want to add there about kind of historical examples of these various different elements that, as they come together, build upon each other in order to allow that flourishing that these unique technologies by themselves wouldn't deliver?
Well, the public databases, the DNS, the name servers on the internet, were the first example, I think, of distributed public databases which guided one to information. So if I wanted to find Google to do a search, there was this shared network of DNS servers, a public shared distributed database with protocols for propagating changes into it that helped me find the information I wanted to find the service that I wanted to find. And that's that bears a structural similarity to the way blockchains work, where a blockchain is a database. But instead of being a database, an Oracle database running on a server somewhere or a small cluster of servers just for redundancy, it's a database shattered across potentially thousands of nodes across different countries and continents and regions with different independent operators who, through a consensus mechanism, keep trusted copies of the data. And that's very much like DNS, right? The way the name servers on the internet share and propagate their information. And what the blockchain has is the ability to have a more general purpose database than just, here's google.com, please turn that into 10.10.10.10 for me, right? So that we can actually store data there that can be safe from disruptions, geopolitical disruptions, natural disaster disruptions, bad actor disruptions, all those things protect it. And it makes it a particularly useful place to have a ledger of events that are immutable, and immutability is a part of trust, right? Anchored in time and accessible to anybody. And that last piece, the accessible to anybody, puts a limitation on it because it's not a good place to store anything private. Once you put it there, it's visible to the world and it's visible forever, which is a big part of why, in working with private market assets like we do, we like to store proofs of data, proofs of calculation, proofs of process steps and sign-offs, not the actual data. For public markets, you could put everything, right? Trades in IBM are by law visible to everybody, right? But in private market, the information, the fundamental information about the assets, the information about the security and its performance and its ownership is all private. And so care has to be taken with how the blockchain is used.
And as we drill down on granularity, down to the asset, down to what drives the value of the asset, depending on the region of the world you're in, you have GDPR rules, right? Particularly, or CPPP rules for California, right? The privacy protocols, right? And as you think about GDPR, particularly number 13 and number 17, Article 13 and 17, the right to be forgotten as an example, right? Anything that bears a name that was a private document, that was not intended as a public document, that was signed, that created value for a private asset. If you had put that on IPFS as an example, literally you have violated your ability to deliver the right to be forgotten of that person unless they intended it as a public document. And so one of the things that we have to do is facilitate the ability to deliver that trustless mechanism and that zero knowledge proof, right? Where we're using the blockchain to commute trust, but through a zero knowledge proof, preserving privacy and the ability to control your own data at the edge in your own systems. And I think this yields all the way through to, if we are going to have the next generation of financial services firms and the next generation of markets that are going to be fully decentralized, and they're going to trade in a manner where you can own and store value in real estate, private equity, private credit, infrastructure assets, and you're going to finance those, and you're going to buy and sell those, and you're going to account for them differently than we have in the past through centralized oracles. you're going to have to treat that data in a new manner, and you're going to need to deliver these new AI solutions with a proof of the state of data that those AI pulled the data from, those AI tools pulled the data from, and then deliver it to a venue where it can be relied upon. And when something goes wrong, and there are lawsuits, because the only guarantee in life is death, and somebody will sue somebody if money's involved, right? And you know, we'll throw taxes in as the third, right? But literally, those, though, we know that they're going to happen, and we're going to need to say, well, we used AI, right? And again, we go back to that Wells Fargo judgment where they couldn't recreate in California how the mortgage approval process was being generated, and they could not deny an implicit bias. That was a $3.5 or $3.7 billion verdict against them on bias built into that AI model. Inveniam is literally built for this. And Albert, I'm going to throw it to you, right? Why does attribution and AI matter so much if we're going to push compute in, right? Why does it matter?
It's a great question, Pat. And let me kind of tell the story through my own personal lens. You know, when I first came to Inveniam, I got a lot of questions and a lot of raised eyebrows. You know, why would a primarily DeFi focused tech company need an AI division? If you look at most, you know, blockchain focused companies, they don't have an AI division. If you look at most AI companies, for that matter, they don't have a blockchain division. So why the combination? Why is it something that most people don't do? And it's really a testament to your vision, Pat. The relentless focus towards exactly what this podcast series is called, the decentralized future of capital markets, because you see the necessity in the use case that the future will reveal, and you understand what it requires. In order for there to be a decentralized future of capital markets, every participant has to come to the table with data that has three attributes. It needs to be trustworthy and useful, first of all, and we'll put the third one aside for a moment. So you have blockchain, which is providing the trustworthy, and then you have AI, which is providing the useful. But neither one is providing the other until you put them together. And when you put them together, you get the third thing you need, which is accuracy. And so trustworthiness, usefulness, and accuracy, those are the mandatory things that you need. And I think that the only way that we have figured that out is by actually sitting there and building the future of capital markets and understanding from a nuts and bolts perspective what it will require. And then having the courage to go back into the laboratory and literally go build the technology that is necessary for that to happen.
Hey, so Albert, what's the difference? What's the difference between trustworthy and accurate, right? Because people would say, if it's accurate, it must be trustworthy, right?
Yeah.
Or if it's trustworthy, it must be accurate, right? Tell me about the difference between those two, and how are they different, and why do we conflate them?
So there's a wonderful story in Greek mythology, and it gave rise to a kind of a condition called Cassandra syndrome. Cassandra was a woman who displeased Apollo, and she was cursed to always give accurate predictions of the future, but to never be believed. And I think that's the difference. You can be right, and if no one believes you, it doesn't matter. And so it's about the trail of justifications that allows someone to follow along and understand why something is correct, rather than just accepting at face value that it is.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's why you have to show your work on the math test, right? You can't just say the answer is 42. You have to show how you got to 42 step by step. And that's the difference between accuracy and trustworthiness.
Yeah, and you know, Inveniam, one of the things we say all the time, right, is literally the you know, when you go into a bank and you get something notarized, they're not saying at the bank what you're saying is true. They're just saying you said it, right? Mm-hmm. But then somebody else has to opine whether it's true or not, right? Whether it's accurate. And I think one of the things that we need to focus on is not only, you know, in the investment world, right, his past performance is not indicative of future performance, right? And, you know, those legends at the bottom say, you know, hey, beware, this isn't true. But why do people prove past performance, right? Because they're credentialing themselves that, listen, I've done this in the past. And then they make the argument about why it's going to still continue into the future. Do you know what I mean? And so one of the things we have to do is we have to show the math, right, on our homework, right? Not just give the answer. We have to show how we got there, particularly in a lawsuit. And so it must be a mechanism for which it is auditable. And this creates all the EUC things, or end user computations, so we can feed new marketplaces that are automated and true marketplaces, not negotiated selling places, negotiated matchmaking sites, which is completely different than a market, right? And we're going to talk about that in a minute and why the blockchain makes that possible with AI. But I want to kind of take a step back. And Kevin, you know, you've talked about this on other podcasts before, right? When you got your degree from Northwestern, I think it was called decision sciences.
That's
right.
correct.
It wasn't even called data science, right? And the distinction of the value of the ledger versus the value of the various types of compute, right? And by the way, I think compute's going to be broken in half as well in the future, right? But then data, right? And data, you know, decision science was the mechanism of compute and the mechanism of the inputs kind of compiled together. And you can probably say this in an infinitely better way than I am, but talk about that evolution, not only of data from decision science, but then data as we're moving from centralized data to data at the edge, and the mass proliferation of data that's going to not slow down. It's only going to increase, right, at the edge. Talk about decision science to data centralized to data explosion.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, we were discussing also before this this podcast whether just by saying blockchain and AI, are we just taking two buzzwords and mashing them together? The missing buzzword, though, was big data, which was, you know, we called it decision science because we didn't have much data, and there wasn't an emphasis on data. There was much an emphasis on modeling with very little data and game theory, rather than assume an ocean of data. Right. So we passed through this period where everybody realized that there was more and more data and there was more and more to work on. And, you know, we spent a decade heralding the arrival of big data. But then, you know, what were the things that held it back? Well, you know, one of the things was
too big data.
Or just that, I mean, certainly too big for any one person to understand. And then the things that were understanding or processing it were too much of a black box. And so you still, even if the answer was right, you didn't necessarily trust it if it was counterintuitive. And so, you know, we're still, the tools, blockchain and AI, are still catching up really to the big data era. I mean, that would be my, you know, and I'm sure there will be other new tools as we get further into both blockchain and AI. We will discover that there is some next generation of tool that we will need to help manage what we thought was our complete mastery, but turns out to be our incomplete mastery of blockchain and AI as tools for managing big data. And also this, yeah, I'll stop there.
I want to yes and you, because when the systems go through the big data, through the pool of information, and come up with answers, without attribution, they're not useful. And the analogy I'll draw is, you may have seen this very famous demonstration of AI where they show the side of a mountain, and when a human looks at it, they just see the side of a mountain, but they have AI look and it can find 3 snow leopards on the side of that mountain. But if the answer just came back, I see 3 leopards, nobody believes it. It's worthless. You have to go then highlight the 3 leopards, right? And that attribution is just what we're doing. We're saying there's a whole lot of information coming at us. And we then say, well, the capital distribution from this limited partnership is, your share of that, Kevin, is $1 million. But without our being able to say exactly how we came up with that number of $1 million, you don't trust it. It's worthless.
Well, no. We create other mechanisms to deploy trust. We had State Street as the fund administrator. We had Deloitte as the accountant. We had we picked big GP manager with spotless reputation. Right. We use other mechanisms.
Right. Believe it because State Street says it so.
Right. We build up mechanisms to convey trust or provide proxies of trust, but not deliver the actual cryptographic proof of auditability and traceability, right?
But in the closed garden of public assets, a very limited number compared to how many private assets there are out there, right? How many different stocks can you buy on the New York Stock Exchange versus how many different office buildings are there in the world, right? That works in the closed garden of just public assets. But when we want to talk about private assets, that's just going to be thoroughly overwhelmed.
We were also saying that copper phone lines were perfectly adequate as a telephone system. If you had AT&T, and if you were in the United States, copper as a generation of telecom technology, that was awesome. And those people and the users of that system, whether it's State Street or AT&T, didn't particularly feel a need, to move to this wireless generation of technology. But if you were stuck back with no phone at all, or with an Eastern European phone system where you had to wait for a dial tone, those people were ready. And so the private markets are like the people with no cell phones or the people with bad copper. They are ready for this trend. They need this transition because it's unaffordable for them to have Wilmington Trust or DTCC or State Street or any of these other.
And the data lives all over the world. The data is growing at a huge rate. It's not in a format that can be read. So we need to deliver these AI tools to go into data at the edge and turn it from unstructured into structured and deliver it into the various different computational tools, software packages, so that a human can read it real time and provide a valuation and appraisal, or an automated valuation model can deliver that, right? And we can start to provide price discovery, and we can start to do comparisons and provide comps from around the world, and we can run waterfalls real time, and we can all of a sudden do these things at scale. But in the private markets, we haven't, and not all private markets are the same, right? Some are more advanced than the others, right? Private credit, private equity, infrastructure, real estate, and even real estate. It's all over the world, right? You might have Mrs. McGillicuddy, in the basement, literally writing on a ledger. You might have Mrs. McGillicuddy working on a laptop, and then she transfers it to somebody else who puts it into a Yardi system. And then you might have, a third person. And so the data is at different states. And so, Albert, when we think about this, is there one AI winner who's going to take it all over? And do we even want one AI winner to take it all over? And how will these various AI tools communicate with each other?
I think the exciting thing is that the race is wide open. It really is. I mean, all the traditional rules of, I guess the traditional rules of technology are staying firm, which are there are no rules. The first movers are not the ones with an advantage. You have, on the one hand, you have Google, who literally invented transformers. The T in ChatGPT, Google invented it, and even took it a step further and really pioneered the current and most, useful method of unsupervised learning to actually train the models and get them production ready. Just completely dropping the ball when it comes to productizing. Just literally cannot get out of their own way. Forgetting the cardinal rule of providing a technology which gives a service to the general public, which is you actually have to give them what they want or what they were looking for, even if they didn't know they were looking for it. Search results, you need to give them what they were looking for. And just all that went out the window. And so now it's wide open. You have Microsoft, which I think people were ready to relegate to the recycle bin, if you will. and just coming right back from the ashes almost, and this OpenAI partnership, and now arguably is the leader. You have AWS, which honestly didn't have a horse. They just waited until the horses got close to the finish line and bought one. And that turns out to be a very useful way to do it, in a very effective way, because it just loads into their infrastructure. So what's really interesting is how this will play out, what people are going to use, and how it will be integrated in their business. We often find that beyond just using ChatGPT to do research and answer things and write emails, most businesses have absolutely no idea how to get started using Gen AI for business use cases, because it doesn't have those three things we discussed. They don't trust it. They're not sure it's right. And they're not sure which use case to use it for first.
I'm going to give an example with new technologies. One of the things that you want to do is you want to use it, but then as you use it, you want to make sure it's right, and you want to compare it against the old technologies and say, do they match up? And if they do, great. And if they don't, what's the delta and why not? And is it revealing something we didn't know, so the old models are wrong? Or are we not utilizing this new technology, correctly, right? And we have to look at the data that's coming out and receive it, right? And this is, the argument is, wave is light a wave or a particle, and looking at the data points and not saying, oh, that doesn't square with our theory, so your inputs are wrong. Versus, no, we need to look at the fundamental models. And one of the things that we're doing is when we look at the fundamental models around the capital markets, we have built certain models where there are choke points that deliver into the single ledger, DTCC, right? Or mediums of trust and exchange, that if we want to explode that out and have a truly networked reality of how capital is going to trade more efficiently in a fully regulated manner for those regulated spaces, how are we going to allow that to happen? And I want to use an example. We have a person on our advisory board who is one of the very famous, built the quantum gateway for the highest functioning quantum computers in the world. And depending on the viewpoint, right? And I've heard all sorts of schools of thought on him from distinctions that I can't even fully, really appreciate. That we can't understand. Not only can we not push data to the atoms in order to inform them, to ask them to do certain things, but we can't even have acceptable readouts of what the output is. So depending on your viewpoint, it's between like 86 and 97% failure rate on reading what is being delivered of data input and data output. So many times, one of the things that they have to do is they have to say, they have to run it multiple times, right? And
statistical process, yeah.
Yep. And so this is what happens, and this is what Bell Labs did, how they got rid of static in the lines. When voice was coming from Europe to America, three different packets were put together. They compared them and said, oh, this is what was really said, right? And so you have to read these things again and again and again, and you got to look at the three different packets and comparative data, or what is the quantum machine telling us? But when a quantum computer is processing data and there is no attribution of where they got the data from, forget about it. Nobody's going to do that. Now let's even take it a step below that. When an AI tool is delivering you performance data around an asset, if there is no attribution, are you going to trust it? Is a regulator going to trust it? Is a court of law going to trust it? Forget if the markets are going to trust it, right? I think that one, it's out. So if we can deliver attribution and we can deliver trust with the source of data that AI is coming to, we provide these guide rails within which AI will run at speeds we hadn't even anticipated they could in the private markets. All of a sudden, there's great excitement. And so, Albert, talk to us a little bit about Inveniam as an on-ramp for these AI tools, right? How will our customers be able to use these AI tools in their own businesses? And how is Inveniam an on-ramp for them to utilize multiple AI tools and say, I want to use IBM Watson X here, I want to use autonomy here, I want whatever it might be, right? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so let's start, at the beginning. Good place to start. which is that most businesses just simply don't even have their data in a format or in a place where it can be used to support an AI computing upon it. Most of the time, they don't even have it in one central repository at all, which is actually one of our key kind of value propositions. Is we don't want, we're the opposite of data lakes. We're the opposite. We want everyone keep your data where it is, like a potluck. Everyone just bring what you're going to bring, take your container home with you. Only put the important parts in. So and necessary for that matter. So that is like the first hurdle is the business actually getting their data to a point where it can be centrally seen. Because if you have 70% of your data feeding into a model and you're asking it to make business-wide decisions or analysis, clearly it's not going to get there. But I think the mechanism that's really going to drive everyone to have to adopt some sort of infrastructure or platform environment that provides some of the things that we provide for their AI compute is what happens when the person on the other side of a transaction has an AI too. How do they interact? What environment can even support that? And the truth is, no one has it. And it's silly that no one's even thinking about that, but that's truly where we are. What happens, sending emails back and forth with different files and revisions is not going to survive two AIs doing that to each other. It is going to spiral out of control very quickly.
Rick, we've talked about Inveniam has been described as a cross-enterprise service bus, right? Where multiple different people, in the ecosystem are utilizing functions, and Inveniam is providing proof of origin of data, proof of process, proof of delivery of data for the different people who are in there. That is a way that it was used to describe Inveniam in our role previously. And as we think about AI tools, one AI agent coming up and delivering to another AI agent an output, what is that cross-enterprise service bus? What is that role that Inveniam plays at delivering data back and forth between different computational tools, different systems, different vendors, but they're all looking at the same source data and there's no bilateral data exchange? What is the value of that? What does that unlock? What does that deliver to an end customer?
So I want to start by alerting any software people out there to the fact that Pat's using the term cross-enterprise service bus as sort of an analogy. That we are not a cross-enterprise service bus in any way, shape, or form. We're not the TIB. We're not that. What we do is work with our customers to find data on their systems, and we use AI to structure it for a particular use and deliver it. Well, and then we deliver it to consumer systems. So if the example is a partnership wants to do their 10Ks, right? They can expose their SharePoint drive that has all the documents about the partnership agreements and the side letters and the capital account contribution statements, et cetera, et cetera. And we can look there and we can use our AI to look through that and find the very specific tidbits that a system like Cascada would use to do waterfall calculations and understand exactly capital contributions or capital distributions required for that and generate the 10K. And so the AI is used to find the information of interest among lots of other information, right? The contract, the 87-page contract where every comma and every word means something to a lawyer, but we just want to know these 12 things, right? Find that and then structure it. And then Inveniam will then deliver that in a computable format, JSONs typically, or XML, to an external calculation engine and get the results back and distribute them. But of vital importance is each step along the way, we're creating these zero knowledge proofs. Here's the document we looked at. Here's a hash of that on blockchain. Here are those 12 pieces of information we pulled out of the 84-page document, along with what page they came from and where on the page. So they're quotations, they're not guesses by the AI or hallucinations by the AI. Hash that, put it on the blockchain. Here's where Albert Berdellans signed off on it and said, yep, that's right. Hash that process step and put it on the blockchain. Now we send it off to Cascada. Hash that transaction. Here's the data we sent to them, when, why, by whose authorization, etc. And so AI is helping us find the particular tidbits of information that we need among a pool, and information not on our system, but on the customer's system, and structure it appropriately. Then Inveniam uses blockchain as the place to keep zero knowledge proofs of every step along the way. Every source of information, every transformation of information, every approval and release of information, every transmittal of information to external systems, to assess evaluation, to do a waterfall calculation, whatever, to do anything that one can do with information about private market assets, lend against it, whatever.
Would lend against it, right? Have better data that is more frequent, that you can get better marks, so you can get better accounting treatment, and better accounting treatments because it's more accurate, and so there's not as
it has an observable, sophisticated third-party arm's length process, so it lives up to accounting rules, so that
absolutely, that then leads to better lending, that better leads to better secondary markets, that leads to new and novel primary forms of distribution, right? And as we think about that value chain beginning to end, there's different steps along the way, and you don't get to the end first. You really need to understand the asset, be able to do that. And along the way, as we get better accounting treatment, better collateralization, the new secondary markets might not develop before derivative markets develop at scale, right? So when you say what will happen with real estate, will we have a real estate market that is trading in a fully digitized manner before there is a fully digital derivatives, global derivatives marketplace created on real estate that is not unique to each deal, but that is tradable and understandable globally, because you have comp sets that are correct, and in the U.S. markets and in the public markets, the derivative markets are bigger than the primary markets because people can get in and out of them, so they hedge that risk and maneuver that risk and gain liquidity on it, so they don't need to sell the underlying, right? And this is where all of this data, if we can move your asset onto a platform like Inveniam, use multiple AI platforms, deliver that functionality real time, get better data, deliver it to the computational systems like evaluation, run your K1s at the end of the year with attribution, right? I mean, there's efficiency gains, there's knowledge gains, there's accounting treatment gains, there's opening up of new market gains, and it's the paving of the way of primary distribution in a whole new way where we store and trade value. But that's the end of the road. That's not the beginning. The beginning is, how do we get good data in markets that are inefficient? We deliver that data and we open up that market because we have price discovery, and we get that better accounting treatment, we get better collateralization, we get better capital treatment. And Kevin, why does somebody who's a GP care? Right? Why does an enterprise manager care that they can put part of their business on the Inveniam platform and use AI? Right? What is the promise of AI to an alts manager really mean to them, rather than trying to take their really hairy data and shove it into a 40-year-old model, instead of, let's take our really hairy data and put it into the model that's in for the next 40 years? Why do they care?
Well, I mean, I'm going to say, how do they know they need help? And I think the answer to that is, if they are already dealing with the words that say, please see the attached, in the attached, you will find, then, and that is a place where GPs live all the time. They are sending out call and distribution notices. They're trying to read limited partnership agreements. They're trying to deal with the version control of that. So and to me, anyone who's still dealing with email and PDFs is that target that is 2 generations of technology behind. They are the person that does not have a working phone system. And so how they know they are in that moment is their cross enterprise service bus is please see the attached. And so
I emailed it to you 3 weeks ago. Right?
Yes. Could you send it again?
Kevin, can I take that? Right. And I think that early adopter, right? Somebody who's managing 400 billion of alts and is worried about being in the top quartile, he's already doing it. It's being done. And not only that it's being done, he doesn't care about it. And all he does is throw a beating on somebody who's supposed to deliver the data. And if it's late, he fires them and brings somebody else, and they just layer bodies on it. But the person who's at 100 and wants to go to 400 to 500 billion, or the person who's at 500 billion and want to go to 2 trillion in alts, all of a sudden, or the person who wants to say, I want to build the world's first derivatives marketplace for real estate. And I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do that in a specific geography, that I'm going to locate it. And I'm going to deliver the compute power to correlate these assets to other assets around the world. And I'm going to find the proprietary data sets that I need. And I'm going to permission for people to upload and correlate their assets. And all of a sudden we have the basis for derivatives, indexes, all of these various different things. So we don't need to trade the title, but we can create these tools that will be digitally native and really bring an old market way into the future, right? And then, we can think about this with private credit, and especially as private credit is exploding, and all of a sudden people are having a hard time keeping up with the paperwork, right? And the risk is not being shown. Bloomberg has talked about this a lot, right? Because 7 trillion left the banking system, and it went into money markets, and it's now being deployed, and it's being deployed not supervised by the OCC or FDIC. Instead, it's being supervised somewhat, by brand new private credit managers that went from 0 to 10 billion that are then levering and have 40 billion of new credit out there. And all of a sudden you go, wow, there's a whole, controls issue out there. And they don't even know what's in their own portfolio and the performance of it, other than on a 120-day lag, maybe. And so who are the early adopters? Who wants to grow? Who are the new entrants? Because the guy who's always seeking is the better performance, so that he can maintain his position, they're not the early adopter. Full stop. They're just not. We have about 15 minutes to go. I would like to encourage anybody who has comments or questions to send them in to us, right? But I want to go to around the horn. Talk for a minute, Albert, for you to lead. What is Inveniam doing with AI? How are we an on-ramp to AI? How can people use it? And then Rick and Kevin, I want you to talk about why does it matter and who are going to be the early adopters of this? Meaning, who do you think are going to say, oh, this is really the early adopters that we're already seeing? Or you think, oh, this is going to just change their world?
Yeah, so a lot to say.
And by the way, if you don't like that question, answer the one that you do like.
I got it. So a lot of the AI providers, when I first started talking to them, they really thought that the answer to all of their problems in applications to enterprise was more data, more compute. That's going to solve everything. I just need a larger sample size. I need more computing power. I'll get there. And it turns out that that is not the case. So we have a very exciting research project ongoing, and I can't say too much about it. I know legal's watching this, but I won't say too much, but we have a very exciting research project about exactly the intersection that we're talking about today, which is blockchain and AI. And the research project involves how does an AI model's or generative AI model's accuracy as measured by F1 improve with a greater number of immutable references? Because what most people tend to forget, even in a retrieval augmented generation approach, where the model is taking information from a knowledge base and then generating them. It's still generative AI. Sometimes the AIs get a little creative on how they retrieve and transform and interpret and then return that data. And any amount of creativity is bad in that. So when people say that AI is used for data extraction and they're using an LLM, it's just not true. It just isn't. And you need an environment in which that process is under control, and as a fail-safe, be able to actually check where things came from. The black box is not acceptable. And when you have two black boxes of two or more AIs, it's not additive. It's not two black boxes. It's black box squared, because the errors or mistakes or omissions or cheating tend to compound. And that is where all these applications are starting to fall apart. And the major AI providers are now coming back after initially saying, no, we just need more data, coming back to us and saying, well, let's look at that platform environment again. So it's a very exciting time to be in that position.
It is. The Kevin and Rick, we're gonna come to you to respond to that, but there's an idea, right? What isn't the original data good enough? But I think the question is, in alts, most of the world's data is kept in Excel, right? Or in some email that it was sent, right? Well, how do you prove that that document hasn't been altered, right, in any way, shape, or form, right? Just the delivery of the email is no proof of it unless you got a form of a cryptographic stamp on it, right? And so maybe Rick or Kevin, do one of you want to answer this question maybe a little bit better than I did?
You're muted,
Rick, you're on
Rick.
mute.
Apologies. Let's say it's a PDF. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't matter. That we use as the source of data for calculation. When we take that in and mark it, okay, this is final, this is what we're going to use as the source of data, we take a cryptographic fingerprint, a hash of that document. So the document's the finger, and the hash is the fingerprint, and then we write that to the blockchain, where we can't change it if we want to. That's the FBI's database of fingerprints. And then when there is a dispute in the future, and someone says, well, this is the original spreadsheet that we used that had all the data in it, they can prove that it's exactly that spreadsheet, that not one bit of information has been altered in that since the date upon which it was used. And now I look at Ralph Montague's question. So they could destroy the data, right? It's in their possession, but there are laws that say that you can't destroy information about securities transactions, and so they'd be liable for destroying that data. We don't take a copy at Inveniam. We say that you hold on to your data, it's yours. And frankly, so that your data destruction policies can be applied to it if it says you keep them for 7 years and then destroy them.
And the versioning control is still there, meaning without Inveniam, a non-loggable software solution, right? If you change a cell in Excel, nobody knows, right? Other than you, right? And you're literally, there is no mechanism to prove change of state in Excel. And so if you use an Excel spreadsheet as that intermediate tool to deliver data, right? And they say, oh, I kept it, here's the Excel spreadsheet. What happens currently is people turn Excel spreadsheets into a PDF in order to create a timestamp on it, right? And what we're doing is saying, no, let's just write this, run a SHA-256, create this hash, stick it in the payload of a block so we can prove this was the state of the data. And let's keep that data in its highest functioning format so that if it's feeding other tools, we haven't taken it offline. You know what I mean? All we're doing is saying this is the provable state of data on this date. And what that does is if we can do that every night at midnight, what we've done is through the logging and the audit trail, we change what is called end user computation, EUC, into something fully logged and auditable. And once that happens, all of those tools that are driven, and all these assets that are driven off of Excel that feed various different systems, because Excel really is the middleware for so many of these different alts systems, that literally we can then start to use that data to feed marketplaces that actually are marketplaces where you can bid, and where there's a bid and an ask, and you can buy based on the data, and you're not forced into a negotiated sale bulletin board. Because if there's too much EUC, the regulators say this is not a marketplace, because you need to put the onus on everybody to do all the research, because the data is not auditable. And so they need to check every single document themselves. So if we ever want real world asset marketplaces, we cannot have EUC, and we need to be able to structure data at the edge and deliver it into compute. Kevin, give us your thoughts, brother. Final thoughts on this podcast.
Actually, I wanted maybe I'm not up to that. Well, I wanted to answer Ralph's question just a little on, and this is more as a jury foreman in an intellectual property litigation that I had to sit on. When it comes down to the credibility of what did the parties know at the time, we don't have good tools for today, and it's left to the imagination of the judge or jury. And the point is, one of the many benefits of blockchain plus AI is that it no longer has to be left to our imagination and what you can persuade us of.
What was the state of data? What was the source of data? What was delivered to the next person, right, is what we're going to be able to do. And if we can have somebody use Inveniam, upload their asset onto our platform, use our platform as a mechanism to give others access to their data as service providers, and then let other tools be run on their data, right? Whether it is IBM's tools, right, where we're in access to IBM Watson X, or Autonomy, or Textract, or Albert's going to be delivering these at scale, where people can say, I want to use Cascada as a waterfall tool. I want to run a 10K. I want to, whatever it might be. I want to, or my K1s, sorry. I want to deliver. I need a gross asset value. I want a new NAV. I want a daily AVM, automated valuation model, to be running on every day on my assets in between these third-party marks. And all of the data inputs and outputs are being regulated. And then that creates a marketplace where all of a sudden the capital markets can come to you because they trust the value of your assets. And you're literally opening the door to every other venue in the world for how you gain access to capital, which in this market is not such a bad thing. Rick, any final comments from you, brother?
No, thank you for involving me in this. I've enjoyed it very much. I think we're doing great things.
Agreed. Albert?
I think what's really exciting is the future that's unlocked as we implement these things. When using the internet example, until broadband, there were entire industries that could not exist on the internet. You couldn't do online gaming until broadband made it possible. And Xbox, pioneered with Xbox Live and all that. And the idea is that when you get to the point where due diligence takes minutes or days instead of weeks or months, what kind of industries does that unlock? Who does it make obsolete? And that's a concern. But what does it unlock? What does that velocity change about the way your business works?
So we have the next 16 podcasts are coming up. We have about 60 companies that are participating in this. So some of them will have 8 or 10 folks on. Some will be smaller, just the 4 of us. And we're talking about how we move this forward. We're going to have next week's really a smaller one where we're talking with the folks from Elevator Labs and talking about what we're doing with them around building information management systems and how they're going to be the middleware. They're one of our partners. They're utilizing Inveniam.io, delivering data from building information management systems directly into protocols like Centrifuge, Maple, et cetera, as well as traditional banking channels and lending channels. And that's terribly exciting because their application is built natively on Inveniam, which is totally exciting for us. So this is an exciting time. We're excited to work with you as we are plugging in a whole lot of these new partnerships that we're going to be announcing in the next couple of months as an on-ramp for real assets to control their own data and deliver it to computational tools at scale like AI in order to form digital instruments that are on the distributed ledger. That's what we want to do. Hey guys, thanks so much.